Welcome back. All right, so today we're going to talk about the New York Rangers and how they fell short of the playoffs. And of course, now they've gotten rid of their president and general manager, and there's all kinds of upheaval. I still don't understand why. And I'm saying that because this was a team that was built for the future more than the now. This was a team that we understood was going through a retool slash rebuild, and that they weren't really coming out of it yet. That there were a lot of younger players occupying pretty substantial positions on the roster, and that's going to lead to some growing pains. Also, their division, kind of a group of death. So when they end up finishing outside the playoffs and having a record of 27, 23, and 6, that's not a bad record. And then they score 177 goals, they allow 157. So their goal differential is pretty good. And of course, a lot of this is going to be the Philadelphia game skewing it, but it's a pretty good overall record. Their numbers, not too shabby. So with the New York Rangers, I really think we're going to see them take that next step next year. This reminds me of Ron Francis is a situation I'd use as an example. Ron Francis in Carolina gets the boot. The next year, Don Waddell comes in, makes changes which, were major in terms of the result on the ice. But you could have seen the Carolina Hurricanes making some of those steps if Ron Francis had stayed for another year. So, and I mean that. Like, I really think that Carolina under Ron Francis the following year would have seen some improvement. So, the power play for the Rangers, 20.67%, not too bad. Penalty kill, 82.25%. Again, the overall numbers for the Rangers are good. So this is not a team that we're looking at and saying, wow, when is this going to get better? And, wringing our hands about it. It's not bad. So Panarin is their top scorer. 42 games played, 17 goals, 41 assists, 58 points. Dynamic player who was good in Chicago, very good in Columbus, has been absolutely fantastic for the New York Rangers. So while it's an expensive contract, it's a contract that so far has paid off pretty well for the Rangers, even though they haven't had the playoff success as of yet. But again, I don't think they're that far off. This is a team that could be a contender, I think, for first place next year with the right tweaks being made. And I mean tweaks. This doesn't really require major trades being made. So if they do make major trades or signings, that may actually end up hurting them long term, but we'll see, right? So underperforming contract, the only one I could find that I said, is Jacob Trouba. Now, 38 games, 2 goals, 10 assists for 12 points. He is being paid $8 million a year for a while. And he's being paid in New York because Winnipeg looked at his demands and said no, and so he goes to New York, right? So I say it with this caveat. So the year before he goes to the New York Rangers, he had 50 points. He had 12 this year in 38 games. Yes, the role that he would have played with the Winnipeg Jets is being occupied by Adam Fox. Fox is getting all those points. Trouba doesn't play the same role, but still, I think, would they want a few more points out of him? Probably. So it was between Brendan Smith or Jacob Trouba for me on an underperforming contract. Smith's is up now. It's done. So, again, you guys can let me know what you think in the comment section below. But for me, Trouba was the only one I found because they don't have a really awful contract on this team. They really don't. Even the Trouba one, yeah, it's expensive for a long time, but I don't think it's a bad contract. Top goaltender, Igor Shesterkin. 16, 14, and 3, 916 save percentage, 2.62 goals against. Shesterkin got off to a rough start this year. Had a hard time to start things off, but once he got going, it was fantastic to watch. Absolutely sensational goaltending for them. Georgiev was a bit more of an up-and-down goaltender, but Georgiev's supposed to be the backup anyways. So, right? So I think things with New York, not too shabby. Their record after 10 games was 4-4-2. The record after 20 games was 8-9-3. So they had a hard time, getting out of the gates with a good record, and that puts them behind the 8 ball and is likely the reason they end up missing the playoffs, right? 13-13-4 after 30 games. The record starts getting better after that. 19-16-5 after 40. 26-18-6 after 50 games. And this is where the hype train was huge. And there were a lot of people saying, hey, I really hope the Rangers make the playoffs. I'm rooting for the Rangers. They're going to make the playoffs. Not understanding that they'd have to pass Boston, who were playing just as well, right? And They end up 27, 23, and 6. It's a record here. So they did fall off at the end. They went 1-5 in their last 6, which makes the record look worse than I think what it is. And so, yeah, I mean, I thought they played well. I really did. And so when we go back to regular divisions next year, I know that the Metro is going to be completely stacked. But I think the Rangers are going to be a contender in it because you're going to see a lot of these kids, I think, taking that next step. At home, they were 14, 11, and 3, and on the road, they were 13, 12, and 3. So kind of just your average record at home, your average record on the road, not super fantastic in either, not really bad at either, just a good record overall. Against Boston, they were 3-4-1, so that's understandable. They won't be in the same division as Boston next year. They were 6-1-1 against Buffalo. Well, they're not going to be in the same division as Buffalo next year, so they'll be sad about that. 6-2 versus New Jersey. Well, they're staying in the same division as New Jersey. 2-5-1 against the Islanders. They'll stay in the same division as the Islanders. We'll see if the Islanders, if their situation changes next year. They're going into a new building though, so that may very well bring up the Islanders' record next year, right? Philadelphia 4-3-1 against Philly, and a couple of those are famously lopsided victories for the Rangers. 2-4-2 against Pittsburgh and 4-4 against Washington. So their inability to win enough games against Boston, the Islanders, and Pittsburgh is why they're not in the playoffs. But they played well against Washington, and they played well against everybody else in the division. So it was a really tough division, and we'll see how things go for them next year. Now, they're pending UFAs. Phil DiGiuseppe is a pending UFA. Obviously, if they want to bring him back, they can. Brendan Smith, pending UFA. That frees up some cap space. Jack Johnson, pending UFA. Frees up some as well. And we'll see what they do with that. Keeping in mind, they have a lot of young players who are going to need raises. So you don't want to spend too much money now because you're going to end up handcuffing yourself later. Key injuries. So I don't have Mika Zibanejad on the board because Mika Zibanejad played almost every game. But Mika Zibanejad, it took him longer to get over having COVID than it's taken some others on the in the NHL. And it definitely seemed to affect him throughout most of that first half of the season. And then once he started to get his stamina back, and once he got up to speed, absolutely great season for him. So I would qualify that as kind of an injury because he was playing below 100%. Artemi Panarin did miss 14 games. Jacob Trouba ends up only playing in 38. So again, if as long as they can avoid injuries to those guys, it is pretty impressive that they put up the record they did when they had two core guys that were out for as long as they were, again, in that division, right? Restricted free agents. Pavel Buchnevich, who had a really good season. He's going to get some money. Philip Hedl. I don't know how long Philip Hedl's in the Rangers organization at this point, although he's still young, so you probably just give him a bridge contract. Julian Gauthier, Brett Howden, Libor Hayek, all kind of in that same category. If you just probably give him qualifying offers, bridge contracts. And Igor Shesterkin, who may make some serious money. It depends. Do you want to spend more money on a longer-term contract with the idea that that contract becomes a bargain 3 or 4 years down the road? Or do you just give him a 1 or 2 year deal that's going to, basically improve the team's bottom line, but you run the risk of having to pay him a bunch more money later? So we'll see what they do with Shesterkin, but he is the goalie of now and of the future for them. 22 and under, it is insane how many players 22 and under played on this team that will likely play a role going forward for the New York Rangers. And it shows, again, to me, why I think it's just bonkers that there was this house cleaning going on in the organization, because this is a team that absolutely has a very young roster. Adam Fox, Philip Hedl, Alexis Lafreniere, whose play got better and better as the season went along. Capo Caco, who again had another rough season statistically, but I still think his game's pretty good, and in year 3 he may very well break out. Ryan Lindgren, who of course has been paid now on an extension of $3 million a year for 3 years, which may end up being a bargain. Lindgren was very solid in their top 4. Keandre Miller, who had an excellent rookie season. Again, the scoring wasn't quite there, but for defensemen, you don't read too much into the scoring in the first year. You really can't. There are defensemen who come in and they're fantastic out of the gate, and then they fall off, and there are some who come in and it's kind of slow on the uptake, but eventually it gets there. Brett Howden, who I will see what his role is going forward if they hold on to him, because again, there are rumors of moves being made. Some of these younger players may be traded out to bring in veteran depth to help out elsewhere on the roster. Libor Hayek, Vitaly Kravtsov, who of course has a lot of hype around him, and I think he showed in his appearances with the Rangers that hey, he's worth that. Zachary Jones, who debuted near the end of the season and looked not out of place with the Rangers. Morgan Barron, who played a handful of games at the end of the season. Tarmo Reunanen, who seemed to make an impression on Ranger fans in his brief appearances. Timothy Gettinger, and Justin Richards. That's all the guys 22 and under who made appearances for this team, may very well have a role in this team next season. That's a lot of guys. It's a lot of, and it's not including other players on the team who are still in their mid-20s. This team could be fantastic. And they could win the lottery again this year, which would be fun. I hate to say this, but on June 2nd, if they win the lottery, and there'll be a live stream on the channel for that. I'm going to get a pretty good chuckle out of it if they win the lottery again. Even though this is kind of a wild card year, we're not quite sure on the prospects compared to normal. If you add Owen Power to this blue line, you add Luke Hughes to this blue line, you add Beniers up front, you're just giving them more of an embarrassment of riches with young players when they already have so many good young players. New York Rangers might be a bandwagon team soon. Very, very soon. So I really can't find a negative in this. Normally, of course, if I'm talking about a team that missed the playoffs, I can get into all the negatives. I really don't. I don't understand ownership deciding they need to make all these changes at the top, because it's an impressive crop of young players that are here. And now, after a year of this division and this format of basically a tournament, we'll see how they do next year. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below regarding the New York Rangers. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I'll talk to you again soon.